From the strange, the eerie, and the macabre, horror has always been a fascination. And this is seen in the history of filmmaking, with some of cinema's most iconic early films being horror movies. This includes the 1910 Edison-produced Frankenstein, as well as another adaptation of Mary Shelley's work in 1915 called Life Without a Soul. Dracula possibly made his first on-screen debut in 1921, with the Hungarian film Dracula's Death, which is now entirely lost. More well known is F.W. Murnau's 1922 Nosferatu, which is an unofficial adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. This unlicensed and unofficial status led to the Stoker estate suing Murnau and Prana Films over distribution for the movie, with courts ruling in favor of the estate and ordering all film copies to be destroyed. It was in the 1930s, when Universal Films licensed Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Bram Stoker's Dracula, that the golden age of horror began. It was through critically acclaimed blockbuster films like Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and the Invisible Man that these titans of terrors really began becoming pop culture icons. Lasting for about 25 years, the Universal Monsters film franchise includes multiple sequels and spin-offs to these critically acclaimed films. However, the Universal Monsters end rather unceremoniously in the mid-1950s, with a series of Abbott and Costello comedy films and some really weak sequels to The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Despite this, though, the Universal Monsters really inspired the archetypes that we see today of the vampire, the gill man, and the werewolf, among many others. These inspirations can range from the truly horrifying to the camp, lighthearted, and fun. Taking advantage of how ubiquitous and iconic these characters are, multiple toy companies decided to make action figures and model kits based off of these characters, whether that's Mego's 8-inch figures, which are very generic, to the fantastic Aurora model kits. But some of the best Universal Monster toys, at least in my opinion, come from a little company known for their warrior beasts, their warlords, and a whole bunch of Star Trek rack toys. This is the full assortment of Remco Mini Monsters, a 3 3/4 inch toy line meant to pair with your Star Wars figures or your Mego Dukes of Hazzard. Remco made a lot of toys back in the day, but the Mini Monsters are probably the best remembered. In addition to these more classic looks, Remco also later did a colorway of glow-in-the-dark variants. Bright and luminescent, they're pretty iconic. And speaking of iconic, let's start with the main man himself.
Under the leadership of none other than Count Dracula, known as Big D.
So Big D here is clearly based off of the Big B, Bela Lugosi's portrayal of Dracula in 1931. From the tuxedo to the aristocratic medallion and opera cape, the figure highlights all the iconic parts of Bela Lugosi's portrayal, and makes it into a recognizable, toyetic caricature. From the exaggerated widow's peak to the big teeth, it really is more of a caricature of Dracula, not specifically Lugosi. It could kind of be anybody. Hell, it could be a young Grandpa Munster. So I could see the designers mixing in a little bit of all the Draculas, from Bela Lugosi to Hammer's Christopher Lee, and even Jack Palance. A real awkward feature of this figure is the fact that he has flat hands. Kind of like some Kenner Star Wars figures, he has flat, open hands, and he can't hold anything. The figure isn't double-jointed or Hungarian, so really it just kind of hamstrings the playability and posability of the toy. Luckily the figure doesn't have any accessories to hold, but he does come with this cape. The wool opera cape worn by Lugosi has been replaced by a Kenner Star Wars style vinyl cape. This is a fashion statement also shared with his pal, the Phantom of the Opera.
Not quite perished, my lady love, although some days I wish I had.
Eric, the Phantom of the Opera, is not based off of the 1943 Claude Rains version, but is instead based off of the 1925 Lon Chaney portrayal. Why is this? Well, I suspect it's because nobody remembers that there's a 1943 Phantom of the Opera. Lon Chaney's gruesome makeup and the theatrical horror of the film really cemented it into the public consciousness. Well, that and the fact that it's public domain now. This figure is actually one of the more accurate to its on-screen counterpart, and that's because of the impressive, exaggerated detail in Lon Chaney's makeup. Funnily enough, Lon Chaney's physical portrayal of the Phantom is the most accurate to Gaston Leroux's 1910 novel, with Eric's really unflattering comb-over and his corpulent, almost death's head-like appearance. And while goth theater kids and silent horror fans can find a lot to appreciate in this figure, overall it kind of makes for a boring toy. Unlike, say, the Wolfman, the Phantom's not really an action-oriented character.
Do about all of this.
I know what to do about it. I'll kill them both.
Oh, come on now.
I'm teasing. Probably the only one I need to kill is her.
Eric.
What has happened to your sense of humor?
The Phantom's most dynamic look is going to be the Mask of the Red Death costume worn during the Masquerade Ball sequence. Even though Remco never made it, Super 7 provided a really nice reaction figure that makes a great companion piece to the Remco classic. The Phantom's a massive drama queen when you get down to it, so really, the more costumes the better. He needs them. Now we move on to the most mysterious Universal monster of them all. That's right, the legendary George Lucas. Okay, it's not George Lucas, it's the Wolfman, but there's a reason why that's been a running joke for so many years now. Based off the 1941 Lon Chaney Jr. portrayal of the Wolfman, this figure, kind of like Dracula, leads a lot more into the caricature aspect. The figure has, much like Dracula, really exaggerated teeth, as well as some blood, or maybe cherry jam, running down his cheeks. He also has an afro that I don't remember Lon Chaney Jr. having, but the later Wolfman movies get kind of weird. The figure has its fair share of oddities as well. To achieve the digitigrade wolf-style legs, the figure is sculpted in an odd posture and has really tiny feet. To give the figure a little bit more stability, it has these little high heels kind of built into it. It's a bit of an odd look from the wrong angle. One thing that this figure does have over most of the others is the fact that it can actually hold something. The figure isn't packed with anything though, so it's a little bit of a wash. You gotta provide your own accessories. From the sands of the Giza Plateau, we have Ardeth Bey, known as Imhotep to his friends and his enemies. Based on the 1932 Universal Pictures The Mummy, the figure does a really good job of capturing actor Boris Karloff's likeness, as well as the exaggerated mummy makeup used for the character. Remco went with the more decidedly iconic look for the character. Even though Imhotep spends most of the movie disguised as Ardeth Bey, the mummy itself is too shocking and too interesting to not make a figure out of. Interestingly enough, Karloff's Imhotep is actually named after a real historical figure. While the movie portrays him as a high priest, in real life, Imhotep was the architect of the pharaoh Djoser and made one of Egypt's first pyramids. So really, Imhotep is probably one of the most multi-talented and professional mummies out there. This malicious mummy is one of the harder figures to find in the Remco Mini Monsters toy line. Both the standard version and the glow-in-the-dark version are prone to discoloration and wear. The glow-in-the-dark version is especially prone to its discoloration thanks to the sandy beige plastic used for it. I'd argue this figure is in pretty good shape, but you can even see the discoloration hitting the head, arms, and legs. I've seen way worse though. There's some mummies that look straight up like beef jerky.
Professor, great jerky. My God, this is an outrage. I was going to eat that mummy.
Going to the depths of the Amazon rainforest, we reach the MVP of the Mini Monster Brigade. That's right, the Gillman, the creature from the Black Lagoon. By far the most popular of the Remco Mini Monster selection, the creature from the Black Lagoon is essentially the Boba Fett of the toy line. He's cool, he's suave, he's kind of badass. You can't go wrong with him. Seeing as the creature from the Black Lagoon is a full costume on screen, the Remco Mini Monster has the best likeness to its on-screen counterpart. The Fishman is also one of the most dynamic and action-packed characters in the Universal Monster library, so it's no surprise that he became the instant star of the toy line. The creature is also the most eye-catching of the Remco Mini Monsters, with Dracula, the Phantom, and Frankenstein being primarily black, and the Wolfman and Mummy being earth tones. The Gillman brings in a big, colorful shock of green to the toy line, and if you get the glow-in-the-dark version, it's an even more electric green. However, there's one star that rises and shines brighter than the rest. If you think monsters, the very first Universal monster that's going to come to mind is Boris Karloff's portrayal of the creature in 1931's Frankenstein. Even though Dracula was released 8 months prior to Frankenstein, this is the movie that really solidified the Universal Monsters as a brand we recognize today. Jack Pierce's iconic and eye-catching makeup in conjunction with Boris Karloff's melancholic performance as the creature really solidified Frankenstein as a milestone in filmmaking. To this extent, the Remco Mini Monster does a really great job of capturing a lot of the details in 1931's Frankenstein and its sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein. from the scars on the hands to the little wool vest underneath the jacket. The small paint details on the head also do a great job of accentuating Boris Karloff's likeness, from the scar on the forehead to the sleepy eyes, which in real life were achieved by placing mortician's wax on Karloff's eyelids.
We belong dead.
So why are the Remco mini-monsters so beloved and so collected, both back in the day and even now? When they debuted in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, these truly were titans of terror, frightening the audiences with how macabre, strange, and outlandish they were. And for many people, that's exactly what they are. They're monsters. They're the things that go bump in the night. They terrorize villages, and only well-meaning and brave adventurers can confront them.
There are things that go bump in the night, and we are the ones who bump back.
For other people, these are kitschy and camp, overly theatric caricatures, meant to inspire us to laugh at them and have fun. And for others still, these characters are misfits, outsiders, tragic heroes and rebels just trying to make their way in a world that doesn't accept them. Because of this, the Universal monsters appeal to and inspire just about anybody. Someone looking at Frankenstein as an unstoppable, brutal force of nature is just as valid as someone looking at him as a tragic hero looking for his place in the world. It's because of these changes in perspectives that we love the Universal monsters. It inspires us and motivates us to create new and interesting stories. Overall, these action figures are pretty great representations of the silver screen's earliest horror icons. It's why a little toy line of 3 3/4 inch action figures had such broad appeal back in the 1980s, and still does to this day.